Field Yates, ESPN NFL insider. He was at the Combine over the weekend. Also, you can check out his weekly First Draft podcast with Mel Kiper, draft expert. Field's updated prospect rankings will be released this Wednesday on ESPN.com. Field, good to talk to you again. Help me understand the J.J. McCarthy love.
Well, first of all, good to be on with you again, Dan. And I think that we all know that quarterbacks are going to be inflated in the pre-draft process because of the fact that it's the hardest position that I would argue in all of sports to find a capable option at. But this offseason is particularly ripe for a quarterback like J.J. McCarthy to move up the board because of the fact that you've got a handful of teams that are all fishing in a very, very small pond right now. If you look at the teams beyond the top three in the current NFL draft order, Chicago, Washington, and New England, you then get to teams starting as soon as, I would argue, pick 6, the New York Giants, who might well be in the quarterback market this offseason. You've got the Giants, you've got the Falcons, you've got the Vikings at pick 11, you've got the Broncos at 12, you've got the Raiders at 13, you've got the Steelers at number 20. Then you have other teams like, for an example, the Los Angeles Rams, who not for this year, but might be eyeing the future. So the point is that you've got a lot of teams hunting for a quarterback, and there's only one team for Baker Mayfield, and there's only one team for Kirk Cousins, regardless of where those teams are, which is going to lead teams to turn towards the draft. And JJ, I think, probably has put himself in position to be the 4th quarterback off the board. Relative to where I will have him ranked on Wednesday, I won't spoil it all, but I have him at 27th on my overall prospect rankings. So that will be incongruent with where I think he winds up going in the draft. But this is the quarterback tax that very much impacts in a positive way guys like J.J. McCarthy.
Yeah, but I wonder about this, that he gets credit for going to the Combine. Well, yeah. Okay, should you get credit for going to the Combine? The other quarterbacks had nothing to gain by working out the top 3. And if McCarthy wants to kind of close that gap between, the top 3 quarterbacks and then the 4th quarterback, then I understand him going there. But I don't know. Once again, I don't get the love. I don't understand it because I watch, and I didn't think he was the best player on his own team or offense. But It feels like Denver loves him. Maybe Minnesota loves him. Kind of wild. Does he deserve credit for working out at the Combine?
Well, so here's what I would say is, first of all, however you and I feel about him might be, it's going to end up being irrelevant because I think the NFL is going to end up liking him a whole lot more than maybe we are talking about him in this vein. And there are certainly some traits to really like about J.J. McCarthy. He's a very good athlete. He has excellent ball placements. He's able to move and throw on the run, things that are important traits that can travel, because the offensive line he'll likely play behind in the NFL is not the one that he played behind at Michigan this year, which had 6 offensive linemen at the Combine. Yeah. So guys who aren't even starters for Michigan are at the Combine as one of the 320 or so best prospects. Mel Kiper Jr. reminded me of something early on in the process this year, and he is going to hammer it home with me and anybody else who's involved in the draft, which is that sometimes your first scout on the player, your first instinct on the player, your first evaluation on the player is going to end up being the most accurate relative to where or what he becomes in the NFL. Because events like the Combine are certainly important pieces of the puzzle. But over these past 5 or 6 days, we've seen players who all of a sudden their stock is going way, way, way up without doing anything that actually involved playing a football game. I'm not saying a 40-yard dash is not important, or the bench press or the 3-cone drill or anything that they did over these past 5 or 6 days. But I've always felt like maybe the most important part of the Combine is actually the medical evaluation, because that's the kind of stuff that us on the outside don't have great information on, and even teams themselves are going to learn more about, because you can't figure out on film whether a guy has, a bulky knee that needs further examination and the potential for, a second surgery or something of that nature. So while I think the Combine has become the signature event of the NFL offseason, and I certainly love being there, I do think there is a very delicate balance that we must maintain, which is we just spent 5 months watching these guys on the field. And in the case of some of these players, 4 full seasons prior to that. That should be the most important part of the evaluation, but it's very tempting to latch on to record-setting 40 times or guys who can bench press 225 pounds for 35 plus reps.
Talking to Field Yates, ESPN NFL insider, after he was in Indianapolis for the Combine. Trade market for Justin Fields is what?
I thought going into the Combine, Dan, that this might end up being one of those where Chicago it's like a real estate offer. Like they're managing multiple parties involved, and it felt a little bit softer coming out of Indianapolis than I had initially anticipated. That being said, even if right now a deal isn't done, and I thought that their general manager, Ryan Poles, was very transparent, actually admirably so, because this is a human situation on top of it being a football situation, about how he wants to make sure that this is done in an expedient manner to not drag things along for Justin Fields if they end up trading him. But once the dominoes start to fall, and we could have a domino fall as soon as tomorrow, that being Baker Mayfield and the possibility of a franchise tag, teams that right now have a plan A or maybe even a plan B will have to pivot to other options. So when I began talking about J.J. McCarthy and referencing how more buyers than there are options, I think that does impact the Fields market, the Justin Fields market, as I do think Chicago will end up finding something that they can get done. And I've found the most relevant data point as far as trade compensation is concerned to be the Sam Darnold deal a few years ago. You have to not look at the results of the trade to Carolina, but rather the fact that Sam was the third overall pick coming into his fourth NFL season, like Justin is. Obviously not all good, but also there are some traits that, teams continue to be interested in Sam Darnold. That's why San Francisco signed him last offseason. So enough there that an acquiring team could compel itself to make the package that Carolina did. So I think a second-round pick and maybe a little more is about what it ends up taking to get done to acquire Justin Fields.
18-game schedule, not a question of if, but when?
I've seen the various tidbits of reporting on it, and I felt when we moved from 16 to 17 that the idea of going to 18 was just an eventuality. I didn't have a sense of the timeline, but I think that we have seen, while there was initially some pushback on the idea of going from 16 to 17 games, that when the NFL consistently churns out 48 or 49 of the top live programming events of the calendar year on TV, that there's just that much money available, and the money goes into the pockets of the owners, of course, but it also goes in part in the pockets of the NFL players. And when we just saw a week ago that the NFL salary cap for 2024 spikes by $30 million, a previously unprecedented mark, it only further, I think, emboldens the powers that be to consider that 18-game schedule, because if that $30 million spike can be something that can happen more than once ever, it ends up impacting everybody in a very positive manner.
Great stuff, Field. Thanks for joining us. We appreciate your time.
Right back to you. Thanks for having me.
That's Field Yates, ESPN NFL insider, and the weekly podcast, the First Draft podcast with Mel Kiper Jr. And coming up Wednesday, he will have his updated prospect rankings on ESPN.com.